UN General Assembly is scheduled to vote on a resolution opposing any recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This comes after President Trump earlier this month boldly announced his intentions to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is warning that the U.S. will be taking names. And today, during a cabinet meeting, President Trump doubled down on Ambassador Haley's message. Take a look.
I like the message that Nikki sent yesterday at the United Nations for all of these nations that take our money and then they vote against us at the Security Council, or they vote against us potentially at the Assembly. They take hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars, and then they vote against us. Well, we're watching those votes. Let them vote against us. We'll save a lot. We don't care. But this isn't like it used to be, where they could vote against you and then you pay them hundreds of millions of dollars and nobody knows what they're doing. So, Nikki, that was the right message that you and I agreed to be sent yesterday, and I've had a lot of good comment on it, believe me. People are tired of the United States. The people that live here are great citizens that love this country. They're tired of this country being taken advantage of, and we're not going to be taken advantage of any longer.
And joining us now is Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. All right, Danny, I love the idea of taking names. I love the idea of, you know, you're not going to do this to us anymore. But is it anyone's business where the United States decides to put its embassy in a foreign country?
Good evening, Judge. The UN has no right to tell Israel where the capital of Israel should be. And the UN has no right to tell the U.S. where to put the embassy of the U.S. in Israel. The audacity of the UN must stop. And I think tomorrow we will see another session of bashing, not only of Israel, bashing of the U.S. And no resolution that will pass can change the reality that Jerusalem is, as always will be, the capital of the state of Israel. You cannot change that.
You know, so many presidents have promised that they were going to do it. What is it about this president that, I mean, obviously he's much stronger. But why would they promise it and not deliver? What was the harm to them? Were they afraid of these other countries?
We see a different kind of leadership, and we appreciate that. It was a courageous, bold decision of President Trump. And not only that, also the veto of Ambassador Haley in the Security Council. Last year, I was in the Security Council, last December, and there was another resolution, and the previous administration supported that shameful resolution. We see the change. We appreciate it. This is the way to handle the UN, to come with your values, with your ideology, and to change the UN. We need to reform the UN.
And clearly the president is going to do that. He talked about it with NATO, and now he's talking about it with the UN. But what money? I mean, is there money to individual countries that can be impacted by, you know, the United States saying you don't vote with us, we're not going to give you money anymore?
Well, that's for the president and Ambassador Haley to decide about that. But there's a lot of hypocrisy in the UN, and if you give money to those countries, I think you should demand from them. That's what we do when we support countries. I called many ambassadors today, and I told them, we support you. We share technology, cybersecurity, defense. So now we need you tomorrow at the vote. If you do not support us, we will also take notes.
Why? I mean, even the United Kingdom, I mean, you know, they're always supposed to be considered an ally. Why do they feel that they should have a say as to where Israel has its capital or the United States puts its embassy?
They think that they support the peace process, but it's exactly the opposite. They don't support the peace process. They support the Palestinian ideology of incitement, of running away from a dialogue. The only way to move forward is to have direct negotiations between the Israeli and the Palestinians. And the president's decision is the right move, because now that Palestinians understand that there is a new leadership, they have to decide whether they're joining the negotiations or we are moving on without them.
And so, I mean, by saying that, you know, this is going to disrupt the peace process, that's just their excuse. In fact, it hasn't gone forward for a long time. Maybe this is the way to do it.
Look what happened in the last 20 years. So many emissaries, so many summits. Nothing happened. I think this is the right approach, and I think the president will be engaged with the peace process.
I think so. Anyway, thank you so much, Danny Danon.
UN Ambassador Nikki Haley vowing to punish the nations who voted to condemn President Trump's Jerusalem decision. Griff Jenkins joins us live now from Washington with the details as the Middle East calls for, some nations in the Middle East call for another day of rage. Hey, Griff.
Hey, Rob, that's right. Good morning. There are calls for another day of rage in the Palestinian territories and Arab cities across the Middle East following a vote at the United Nations on a mostly symbolic declaration condemning President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. As our ambassador, Nikki Haley, blasted nations who voted against the U.S. and warned there will be a price to pay.
The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations.
But that didn't stop the Palestinian Prime Minister Riyad al-Maliki from calling on member nations to take a stand.
I call upon you on behalf of the Palestinian people to vote in favor of the draft resolution in order to make heard the voice of a firm right that cannot be denied.
In the end, 128 countries voted to condemn the U.S., while only 9 supported. There were 35 abstentions. And 121 of those 128 nations got a combined $21.8 billion in U.S. economic and/or military aid in fiscal year 2016. Those 121 countries accounted for nearly half of all U.S. foreign aid. You see here the top 5 countries of those 121, all Muslim or Arab nations: Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, Jordan, and Pakistan. Among the top 10, actually, Rob, only one did not participate in this vote. That was Kenya. We are hearing about these protests. We're monitoring it in Malaysia. The prime minister leading one of those to stand in solidarity with Palestine. But so far, no images that we can bring to you. Rob?
Okay, we will certainly keep an eye on it, Griff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President. To its shame, the United Nations has long been a hostile place for the state of Israel. Both the current and the previous Secretary Generals have objected to the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel. It's a wrong that undermines the credibility of this institution, and that in turn is harmful for the entire world. I've often wondered why, in the face of such hostility, Israel has chosen to remain a member of this body. And then I remember that Israel has chosen to remain in this institution because it's important to stand up for yourself. Israel must stand up for its own survival as a nation, but it also stands up for the ideals of freedom and human dignity that the United Nations is supposed to be about. Standing here today, being forced to defend sovereignty and the integrity of my country, the United States of America, many of the same thoughts have come to mind. The United States is by far the single largest contributor to the United Nations and its agencies. We do this in part in order to advance our values and our interests. When that happens, our participation in the UN produces great good for the world. Together, we feed, clothe, and educate desperate people. We nurture and sustain fragile peace in conflict areas throughout the world. And we hold outlaw regimes accountable. We do this because it represents who we are. It is our American way. But we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. When a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. Unlike in some UN member countries, the United States government is answerable to its people. As such, we have an obligation to acknowledge when our political and financial capital is being poorly spent. We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways. Those are the thoughts that come to mind when we consider the resolution before us today. The arguments about the President's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem have already been made. They are by now well known. The decision was in accordance to U.S. law dating back to 1995, and its position has been repeatedly endorsed by the American people ever since. The decision does not prejudge any final status issues, including Jerusalem's boundaries. The decision does not preclude a two-state solution if the parties agree to that. The decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, the President's decision reflects the will of the American people and our right as a nation to choose the location of our embassy. There is no need to describe it further. Instead, there is a larger point to make. The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered. Thank you.